The gate marks the entrance to Chinatown. It's located at 97th Street and 102nd Avenue in Edmonton downtown. And many people touch the lions' tongues to bring them bravery and luck.
Chinatown, for me, is a place that reminds me of my childhood. It's a place where I speak my mother tongue, Cantonese, more often than English. A place where the most common foods available reflect what I ate while growing up. Char siu bao, gà lê ao lam fan, dim sum. But it's also a place that seems to be going through some sort of existential crisis these days. This ethnic enclave of Chinatown is over 100 years old, but the reasons for it existing in the first place, many would say are not that relevant anymore. You see, Chinatown here, like all Chinatowns across North America, was born out of racist legislation, scapegoating, and neglect, but grew to become a resilient, supportive cultural space for the Asian community here in Edmonton. But Chinatown has faced and is facing a lot of difficult, complex challenges that I had no idea about, despite being Chinese Canadian and despite being born here in this city. So this docuseries is my personal journey of learning about Edmonton's Chinatown. Like a lot of other Asian Edmontonians growing up in the early 2000s, I went to Chinatown for things like haircuts and family meals. But to be honest, ever since me and my family moved further west when I was around 10, I haven't really ever had a reason to go back to Chinatown. And nowadays, in my mid-20s, whenever I do visit Chinatown, I feel a bit sad and uncomfortable for some reason. Maybe it's a reminder that I don't feel all that close with my Hong Kong Chinese culture anymore, and I struggle to find the right words in Cantonese when I'm trying to make small talk with business owners. Or maybe it's the state in which I see Chinatown in, where it's more common than not to see vulnerable people out on the streets as there's a high concentration of social agencies in the area. Or maybe it's that I just regret not paying attention to Chinatown while now I witness threats of cultural erasure and neglect happening here, only amplified by the COVID-19 pandemic. So last summer in 2021, I decided to finally start working on my first photo book. As a photographer who's really only ever shown his work online, I wanted to challenge myself to see if I could put together a body of work that tells a story of my root-seeking cultural journey in parallel to being introduced to my partner's South Korean culture and her family for the past 6 years. I found the dynamic of being immersed in a new, unfamiliar culture while finding motivation to get closer to my own heritage an interesting topic to explore through photography. I still really want to make that book happen, but during the process of collecting and making photos for that project, I found myself paying attention to any symbols, stories, places, food that I could possibly make photos of to include in the book. And there was a place I first gravitated towards making photos in, and it wasn't Chinatown, it was Richmond, a city in one province over in British Columbia. See, I have been visiting Richmond at least once a year for the past 10-15 years, and the reason for this is because my mom's side of the family, so my maternal grandma and grandpa before he passed away, and my aunts and uncles and cousins, they all live in Vancouver or Richmond. And as of almost 2 years ago, my parents now do too. And Richmond is a really interesting place for me to explore because for me, it's almost like going to Hong Kong and being immersed in that culture without actually visiting Hong Kong. According to Wikipedia, Richmond has an immigrant population of 60%, the highest in Canada. And almost 75% of its population is of Asian descent, many of whom immigrated in the late 1980s, mostly from Hong Kong, Taiwan, and mainland China. So before I even considered Chinatown, Richmond was my playground for just walking around and taking photos to see how my family's Hong Kong Chinese culture was being preserved, embedded, and transformed with new waves of immigration. Richmond in many ways was like my bigger version of Chinatown, but I could only ever visit for a week or two a year, so whenever I returned to Edmonton and looked through my photos, I realized I needed something more. I needed something here, and that's when I considered visiting Chinatown again. I came across a project in October of 2021 called Chinatown Greetings. Chinatown Greetings was started by two artists named Sean C. and Emily Chu, and it aims to explore ways to build healthy relationships between artists and the Chinatown community for sustainable long-term connection. So Chinatown Greetings really caught my attention because before then, I couldn't really see a way to photograph Chinatown for my project without it feeling kind of surface level or somehow exploitative. Something that a local poet, Catherine Guanyin Lennon, said in an interview about her work with Chinatown really resonated with me. And she said, "There is also a part of me that is wary of auto-exoticization and fetishizing/tokenizing our experiences to produce art that may be received by audiences wearing an Orientalist gaze." So I ended up emailing Sean and Emily to express my excitement for Chinatown Greetings, and I went to their first pop-up event to take some photos and meet them in person. I had never seen so many people in Chinatown since I started visiting again. There was a news crew covering the event, and it was just nice to see some artistic activities happening there. Sean and Emily had commissioned a local artist by the name of Ray Dak Lam to create these beautiful Chinatown banners. In fact, it's the one right behind me here. They gave them out to 100 different businesses in Chinatown to display in their storefronts, literally injecting art into the neighborhood that reflects the neighborhood. So this whole thing was really inspiring to see. It gave people a reason to visit Chinatown again, and Emily and Sean wanted to keep in touch, so we met over lunch the following week where I told them about my photo book idea and my journey of getting to know and understand my culture again. And we talked about how I could possibly use my photography to learn more about Chinatown and the things that are currently challenging it. Shortly after this meeting, Sean let me know about a certain TELUS STORYHIVE grant that he thought that I should apply for. And long story short, I applied with this broad Chinatown Greetings video idea, and to my surprise, I got it in January earlier this year, 2022. Of course, I was really grateful and excited, but also nervous because this meant I actually had to do this. And at that point, I didn't even know what this was and where to start. Luckily for me, Sean became my unofficial mentor for this project, especially in those first few weeks when I was wrestling back and forth with what this docuseries could possibly look like. After exploring a lot of options and looking at the timeline for production, which was about 4 short months, and with the support of my family and my friends and my partner Sunny, I sat down and got to work. I first went to the two people I think of when I consider my ties to my Hong Kong Chinese culture, my mom and dad. I asked them what they remember of Edmonton's Chinatown and their personal relationships to the place. But yeah, what was, I guess even you can think back to when you were even younger. Did you go to Chinatown lots?
No, we went to Chinatown quite a bit because actually our cousin or my uncle has a store there right in Chinatown. He actually owned a Chinese grocery and restaurant. So we, as a kid, actually, we hung around Chinatown quite often, quite often. That was like our place to go, either to be eating there or just waiting for them to drive us somewhere.
The 80s.
Yeah, 80s first. That would be us going to Chinatown quite often.
And I was, thinking about like the mid 80s, when we, we move out closer to the downtown area on our own, and then basically personally for me, I try to keep connection my upbringing in Hong Kong, where it's all the Chinese dominated, right? So and then by those days you didn't have like a lot of streaming service like or you didn't have like YouTube or Netflix, say that you can actually access to what's going on, right? Like the culture and the latest development. So we had to actually go there like every Saturday to weekends to rent some VHS tape like the Chinese episodes, or pick up some Chinese newspapers from the bookstore, and there's a particular one Chinese bookstore that has been there like a long time. And I remember the owner there. I knew him for many years, and until he retired. So that's So basically, I had to pay a visit like almost every Saturday. We went out supper too, of course. Dim sum, lots of good Chinese restaurants. Dim sum, evening dinners, and so on and so forth. And hair salon was there. Go there.
Hairdresser was also in Chinatown.
Because by those days, everything's like focused on within a district of Chinatown. Only in the maybe mid-90s or mid-90s that it is expanded out to some other community, West End, South Side, some Chinese development, restaurants and stuff. But in the 80s, I remember I would say 85% of the Chinese restaurants are all focused and located in the heart of Chinatown.
As I listened to my parents describe their individual and collective experiences with Edmonton's Chinatown in the late 60s to 90s, I realized that maybe I wasn't so much of a stranger to Chinatown after all. I found out that my mom's aunt and uncle actually owned a store in the original Chinatown in the 60s and early 70s, and my dad, when he immigrated in the 80s, visited Chinatown at least once a week. The places they described and the things they did were their ties to their home country and seeking out a community here. And when I was born, I guess it was just natural to continue bringing me and my sister to Chinatown. But as we grew up, I didn't see it as much of a priority to stay close with my cultural heritage, maybe thinking that it would always be here and be a part of me. Growing up in pretty white suburban communities, I was probably just worried about fitting in and exploring Canadian culture, which I think I did pretty well. But now I see parallels with my mom and dad in Chinatown, and I realized that this project was not only an exploration of my own cultural identity, but also a way to stay connected to the journey that my parents took as first-generation immigrants. My parents immigrated to Canada at significantly different times, but it seems like Edmonton's Chinatown was a pretty big part of both of their ties to their home country. And the time that they spoke of being in Chinatown, they were about the same age as I am now. So that made me think that there was something here and a lot to dig deeper into. In the next episode, I'm going to be diving into the history of Edmonton's Chinatown to look at the past and see how we got to where we are today. I'll see you in the next one.